All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I'm happy to welcome back to the show Matthew Sitman. He is the co-host of a great podcast called Know Your Enemy. Matthew Sitman, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me back. It was just about a year ago, actually,
Wow,
when we
time flies.
recorded, because I was in Rome and I just had food poisoning, so I had a
Oh.
very rough voice. So for your podcast listeners, where there's no visuals here, if they're thinking, I've never heard this person before, you have once, but I was in rougher shape then.
That is right. That is right. Well, you're back in, strong form today. Very strong.
Some kind of form. I am back. Yeah.
Well, what I love about your podcast is, unlike what I do, where we just have hopefully somebody smart on and interview them, you will pick a topic, often a person, and you and your co-host will read all the biographies about them, and then you will do a huge, very long conversation, which gets edited down to the best stuff. And so it's not just a conversation, but it's like chock full of information, unlike what I do here sometimes. So you did that recently with Elon Musk. It's actually a two-parter. I learned things about him I didn't know, and I thought we'd talk about it here.
That sounds great. Yes. I will say my co-host, Sam Edler-Bell, my great friend, I said this last time too, I always feel very exposed recording a podcast or, a conversation without him. But also our producer, Jesse Brenneman, who's fantastic. I won't go on too long about process here, Matt, don't worry. But he's a great producer and he really makes them listenable, because in this case,
important.
This might be interesting context for some of your viewers or listeners. Sam and I had prepared just to do one long episode on Elon Musk. And we had been recording for about 2.5 hours. And he had barely just gotten to Silicon Valley. Elon Musk had. And we just knew we had to cut it off and do a second episode. So there was that much to say. He has had a fascinating life. And I think, I didn't know that much about him before starting this. I mean, beyond, so as someone who pays attention to the news, I was aware of, his latest endeavors with Department of Government Efficiency and his role in the Trump campaign. But it was really interesting to dive into his life, which we'll get to. But it was, I don't know, some of the things you hear in the discourse just aren't true about him. And also, I just thought it was very helpful to understand what he's doing now with the Department of Government Efficiency. Actually, I saw some real parallels from earlier in his career. So happy to revisit Elon Musk.
Awesome. So now this is a guy who, even before he bought Twitter, even before he was running this Department of Government Efficiency, had biographies written about him. He was already that important, that significant. What was some of the source material that you guys relied on to find out his bio?
That's a really good point, Matt, that he had even before, his kind of current fame, infamy, however you want to put it. I didn't realize one of the books we read, to answer your question, that my Sam, my co-host, read was written by Ashley Vance, and it was about Musk, SpaceX, Tesla, kind of that part of his career especially. But that came out on, I think, 2014 or 15.
Is that Character Limit? That's the title?
No, this one is Character Limit, came out in 2024.
Okay.
It's by Kate Conger and Ryan Mack, and the subtitle is How Elon Musk Destroyed Twitter. So Character Limit, How Elon Musk Destroyed Twitter. That came out in the fall of 2024, and it was my favorite of what I read. So I read that one. Sam read the one that I had mentioned previously on, specifically about SpaceX and Tesla, that was from 2014 or 2015 by Ashley Vance. And then Sam and I both read the more recent Walter Isaacson biography of Musk, which is probably the one a lot of your listeners, viewers will have seen, at airport bookstores, at, on the shelf somewhere. It's just Musk's face, and it was an authorized biography. So it was written with Musk's cooperation, and it was probably the most favorable of the three that we read.
All right. Well, let's dive in with his childhood. If there's a rosebud moment, this is where it would be. I learned he had an abusive father he was bullied, it seems pretty relentlessly. He went on this, the male-dominated South African culture. He
Mhm.
went on some sort of I don't know what it was like a camping trip or something
It
that,
was
that
like
you can
a
tell us.
summer camp, kind of like a
Like a
wilderness.
wilderness thing,
Yes,
right?
that had a bit of a kind of almost military edge, survival edge to it as well. So it was, pretty fierce stuff. Not
Yeah.
for the
Well,
faint
so
of heart.
talk about, because didn't he end up in the hospital or something after this?
Yes, I mean this really was new information to me. Errol Musk, Elon Musk's father, was, as you're saying, was abusive, especially verbally and emotionally. And the great incident of this, I mean, he was always calling his wife, May Musk, the model, Elon's mother, as well as the boys, Elon and Kimball, especially, idiots, you're stupid, you know. But the kind of worst story, the one that really is the rosebud moment, was at this camp that we were just discussing. Elon Musk was bullied. I mean, his brother Kimball described it as kind of a paramilitary Lord of the Flies like
Jeez.
situation where, like, if you were the youngest, and I think Musk was 12 or 13, so he was among the younger kids at this camp, you were bullied mercilessly. You have to kind of like fight to actually eat your dinner. I mean, it was really tough stuff. But there was one incident in particular where Musk was bullied so badly. He was beaten to a pulp, where his brother Kimball, who witnessed it all, said you could barely recognize his face.
Mm.
He didn't barely could recognize his brother. Really got beat up severely. For years later, had to have, I think, kind of reconstructive corrective surgery on like his nose from injuries stemming from this incident. I think was in the hospital at least for a few days, maybe as long as a week. And the real kind of capstone to this story is that being bullied and beaten up that badly would be bad enough. But he gets home and his dad takes the side of the kid who beat Elon up and called his son an idiot and just laid into his son, Elon, for, bringing this upon himself, justifying what the bully did to him, and just berating his son in the process. And again, this was done in the home, again, once Elon got out of the hospital, and his brother, Kimball, again, witnessed this and said it was the worst moment of my life, meaning not just
Wow.
Elon's, but his brother's. It just really seems not exaggerated at all. It was totally in line with like his father's, long-standing patterns of behavior. And it just was a story about his youth that a lot of the people around Musk, his former wives or girlfriends, romantic partners, family members, people who know him, that kind of being subjected to that kind of bullying just kind of shuts you down emotionally. Like, to survive, you have to kind of turn off parts of yourself.
Wow.
And so if, Elon Musk, he might have, be on the spectrum. He might have Asperger's or some kind of autism. He's claimed that, and there's no reason really to disbelieve him. But also, there's these kind of emotional traumas from his childhood that also kind of would affect kind of your emotional, I don't know, kind of your emotional posture toward the world, the parts of yourself that you kind of allow to be open. And the people around him kind of alternate between both of those explanations for some of his, tendencies, habits, behavior. But this bullying story, it was terrible. And it was definitely something that is like the one thing to probably know about his childhood, actually.
How did he end up in South Africa?
Well, that's where he was born. It becomes important for his later story that his mother specifically was from Canada. So
Right.
she had Canadian citizenship, and there were still members of her family there. And not to get ahead of the story, but that's where Elon Musk first goes after he leaves South Africa. He went to college there for 2 years at Queen's and then transferred to the University of Pennsylvania. But he kind of first got out of South Africa by going to Canada because that's where, because of his mother's family, he could get a passport.
But didn't
Um,
his grandfather move to South Africa specifically for the apartheid? Is that right?
yes.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that was his grandfather on his mother's side, because he was a part of this kind of very right-wing, I think it was called the Technocracy Party in Canada. And that party might have actually been banned, but it was part of like the disgust with that, the kind of hopelessness for his style of politics taking hold in Canada was like behind the move to South Africa. And his father's family kind of comes from a line of adventurers, purportedly. And, so both uh, Musk's parents, they met in South Africa. That's when they started dating, when they were both pretty young. And that's where Elon Musk and his brother and a sister were born.
And he gets into, as a young man, like science fiction. And apparently, like this replaces religion.
Well,
And
that
it
was, go ahead.
and that's one of the theories. And then doesn't this inspire him to want to go to Mars?
Well, that was kind of my gloss on it. I mean, you really see he does fall in love, especially with the Douglas Adams Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But science fiction more generally, got into computers at a fairly young age. He actually made a video game, a rudimentary video game, because he got into coding like as a teenager. But yeah, it was very interesting. He did pretty like self-consciously and explicitly reject religion relatively early in his life, like as a teenager. Um, there was like religion classes, Anglican religious instruction at the schools he went to. I think his mother actually taught at a Sunday school, an Anglican church. And he pretty, early on explicitly rejected religion. And he found sort of like his imagination stirred by reading science fiction and reading tales of, different planets and exploring space. And he was kind of like a computer science fiction type of nerd as a teenager.
And by the way, just for those watching or listening, we're going to do this. We're teasing this. We're it's going to skip a lot of stuff. But if you go to the Know Your Enemy podcast, you could listen to how many hours do you think ended up, actually being posted after the editing?
I would say, yeah, like what's posted is about 3.5 hours worth of material.
Yeah, and it's really good. So if you like this and you want more, go listen to that.
Yeah.
Um, One thing I didn't know is, I mean, I know that Elon had a trans child, which I think we should talk about, Vivian. Um, but he also, I didn't know this, he lost his first child. And I'm wondering if how you think that might have impacted this desire he has to like procreate so much and spread his seed and repopulate the earth.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, Matt, because I do think, in addition to this childhood bullying incident we were just talking about, that losing his first child to sudden infant death syndrome was devastating for him. I mean, as you would expect, but it was just, extremely traumatic experience. And I do think because it was his first child, this is a bit of speculation, but if you're Elon Musk, this kind of, engineering mind, um, into the latest technology, part of Silicon Valley set, where, kind of medical advances are, people want to live forever there. And that's kind of in the mix of the background here. But I think what he did was like, well, I'll bring in his trans daughter, Vivian. Now, one of her claims is that, he tried to kind of engineer the children he was having through, in vitro fertilization and kind of, reproductive technologies like that, tried to, went to some expense medically, financially, and otherwise, an effort to have male children. And so having a trans daughter, having her come out like that was, kind of in her speculation, part of the reason for how viscerally he responded. Like it wasn't, there was this added dimension to it. And, I can't speak to the veracity of that. This is alleged,
Yeah.
but I will say it kind of makes sense. Like, Musk loves to simplify. He does have a kind of, engineer's mind in a way. And I think he did, those are the tools he brought to not suffering that kind of trauma again, and kind of engineering your kids so that you don't experience that kind of, trauma and suffering again was, one explanation for, how he's gone about having, I think is now currently 14 children that we know about.
Wow. Um, This is a non sequitur, but are you aware that there's like a disproportionate number of terrorists who are engineers?
I didn't know that, but
I'm not joking.
I'm not shocked by uh, your revelation there.
There is something to that, although not in Elon's case, of course. Um, he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said after his child transitioned, he said something to the effect of, my son is dead and now I will kill the woke mind virus or something like that, right?
Yes, I mean a lot of this, the story of his daughter Vivian has come out recently because she was on the cover of, I think, Teen Vogue, where there was a big story about her. And so when this comes out, it's obviously on social media. That's where fairly recently Musk had said similar things before, but he basically said, yeah, his kid was killed by the woke mind virus, and now he was going to kill the woke mind virus. Like the woke mind virus took my kid. Now I'm going to go after you and kill the woke mind virus.
I've always thought that the trans story, it doesn't make Elon look good for various reasons. So, like, if you're a progressive person, obviously the way he handled this was lacking compassion and decency. If you're a conservative person, do you want someone who allowed their kid to slip away, as he says his son is dead? If you're a social conservative, do you want to put that person on a pedestal and say, obviously he's the expert on this? I don't think that it really is a great look either way.
No, I mean, definitely not. And I think even if I were, if we were, having a conversation about trans issues and I was talking to a conservative I really disagreed with about them, I think even the kind of cruelty, the most loaded language, the most kind of cruel language you could use, I would hope they would reject that. But also just like, I think if you're making arguments about sensitive issues like that in public, your good faith really, really matters. And, if you want to have like a conversation about, uh, you know, trans women in sports and want to be taken seriously, allying yourself with someone who's going to speak with such cruelty is, both morally and strategically unwise, I think. Like, I think you could react to Elon Musk very critically and negatively, having a number of positions.
Yes.
I think regarding trans issues is one thing I'm trying to say.
You said something early on in the Know Your Enemy podcast, episode 1 of the Elon Musk show, that I wanted to delve into a little more. You said that, a lot of times when you're looking at these sort of evil geniuses or something, it's like the thing that makes them great or brilliant kind of had to be there. So there was like something bad happens to them, or their bad behavior. I'm not saying this well, but the bad things about their personality are like also superpowers. But you didn't really find that to be true with Musk. It's like he's just kind of a jerk, and actually his companies may have done better without him. It seemed to be the takeaway.
Well, there's kind of two things I said in this vein on the podcast. One was sometimes even with someone, even putting aside like, is there are the worst aspects of their personality related to their gifts in some way? As W.H. Auden put it, is the wound and the gift given together, such that if they weren't this way, they wouldn't be themselves and therefore would never have accomplished,
Right.
That was one thing. And I'll address that in a moment. But sometimes too, even with people I just strongly disagree with, it's less that I find that connection, that there's just something really charming about them. The one example I had in mind was really Frank Meyer, the old books editor at National Review back in the magazine's first days. And he would stay up all night, calling people all night. He was just kind of this eccentric crank. And
Yeah.
I find those people really charming in a certain way and amusing.
Yeah, and actually,
and when I learned there's kind of more about them than their politics, it humanizes them in a way.
yeah, and that happens a lot on the Know Your Enemy podcast. You will focus on someone who, you don't agree with their politics, but you start to kind of like them a little bit, and because they're idiosyncrasies and all that.
Yes. But there's also the question kind of, what we were just discussing about is there something about like the parts of him I don't like, or that various of your listeners and viewers might themselves kind of not be their favorite about him? Is there something about that that's related to the success of his companies and he's the world's richest man? And, I feel a little silly saying no to that question about the world's richest man, because he has been spectacularly successful in so many ways, at least his companies have. And I do think there's a way. My partner's father is like an MIT trained engineer, has a lot of friends in like Silicon Valley. And even before I knew we were going to do these episodes, I once asked him at dinner, I was like, is there something about Elon Musk I don't get? And I do think as a manager, as like a leading a mission, so to speak, he the main thing I would grant him is he's willing to just think, maybe we could do this, right? Even if it's never been done before. And there have been times, I think, where he can come in and see a problem. And sometimes he really does have a kind of simplifying insight to like, why not do it this way rather than that way?
Yeah.
So I don't want to say he's never, added to, or his role hasn't been important in his company's successes. I'm not saying he brings nothing to the table. What I am saying is I really, you see in his company so often he makes messes that the people around him have to clean up and deal with, that, they could be putting their time and energy in other places. But also it's like, I'm just not sure, do you have to treat your employees a certain way to get certain things done? And I'm just like, maybe this is just a baseline like view of mine about human nature and morality or something, but I'm not sure you get actually the most out of your employees by being cruel towards them. Or, he's fired people who he didn't understand the mistake they made, or maybe they didn't make a mistake. He's fired people around him who actually knew how to fix some of the problems that they were trying to deal with, and in his anger about he fired. So I'm just, it's really, to me, I didn't discover a kind of, this is how I'd summarize it. I didn't discover this like airtight case that Elon Musk has to treat people the way he does and has to be the kind of boss and manager he is to have achieved everything he and his companies have.
Yeah, I hate these people who they don't think you can have a happy work environment with happy employees, because that means they're not working hard. I hate that mentality. And I once worked for a guy who was similar to Musk in the sense that he would set unrealistic goals and expectations. And we would all say, like, this is not possible, this cannot happen. And he would insist on it. And inevitably, things would get messed up. We would roll out a website update and it would be fine. And then the guys who created the website would go to bed and go to sleep. And then once traffic started hitting the website, it would crash. And these guys are on like CPAP machines. They're all like weird engineers and like eccentric themselves. And, and if we had just slowed it down, and I'm of the mentality of like, let's build it right. Let's build it strong. There's really no rush. And I think he thought, like, we're saps if we do that. Like, you guys are going to take advantage of me. You're going to slow roll this. Like, and in my experience, it didn't work. It always backfired. But I guess in the case of Elon Musk, even though there's collateral damage and people get hurt, overall, it must be good business for him.
I mean, he's the world's richest man who's running all these, companies that are, doing extraordinary things in some ways. So again, I feel a little silly pushing this criticism to its limit, but I have the same instincts you do about it. And I do think, when you go through his biography, you see that it's, sometimes it's worked, but did it have to be done that way? Was it actually done the best way possible? I do think Musk, because of some of the traumas and just his psychological and emotional makeup that we've mentioned, he does not enjoy the kind of like family time that would, be a part of a healthy work-life balance, shall we say. He doesn't, I think he's actually most happy fixated on a problem he's trying to solve. That's why when he's been working on a problem for a long time and he needs to sort of unplug and recharge, he goes and plays a video game for like 24 hours straight. Like that's his mind. He wants to be working in a certain sense, or at least he wants his mind to be occupied with, these problems he's trying to figure out. And I think, it's just most people aren't like that.
I mean, I can't imagine being like a father and a husband also working for Elon Musk. I mean, it would be just so demanding, and I don't think he would be understanding of like, hey, I got to go coach this little league game, But I'm a really good engineer,
Yeah, definitely not.
He has a son named X, who is, I think you guys described him as his emotional support child. And somehow, if he has an important meeting, like I think when he met with Trump in the White House, he brings X with him. And whenever he gets nervous, he can focus on X, and that seems to calm him down.
Yes. I actually think the emotional support child was his language. At some point, or something very close to that. He, described their dynamic that way. But little X is the one you see with him all the time at the White House now. Cute kid, picking his nose in the Oval Office, running ahead of Trump to get on, a helicopter. But it is true, like that is one reason you always see him with Musk is, he is this calming presence for Musk in tense meetings or when he's, dealing with certain things.
So your co-host said something that perked up my ears. He said that, and I think this speaks to Elon. You were talking about how Elon doesn't. He can look at a problem and imagine a way to solve it, whereas everyone else would be like, "No, there's no way," But your co-host said that Musk lacks epistemological modesty or something like that. And the reason that my ears perked up is that I've heard David Brooks say this before, that epistemological modesty is fundamentally what conservatism's about. From Edmund Burke to Hayek, it's the idea that the world is too complex and we can never understand everything. So it would be a fatal conceit to try to engage in like top-down planning. And so here Musk is, effectively the co-president, and his entire ethos and temperament is the opposite of epistemological modesty, which is, according to David Brooks, was the fundamental worldview shared by conservatives.
Yes. I mean, I actually think that is correct in the kind of noblest definition of conservatism, the type of conservatism that in some ways I'm still drawn to or have some affection and sympathy for. And it's Edmund Burke's point, going back to kind of the origins, of conservatism as we know it. It was not just like a sort of epistemological humility as a first principle that you just should, adopt because it's virtuous. It was based on the idea that there are lots of things that we use that sustain us, institutions, ways of doing things, customs, that they've evolved for functional reasons that way, even if the reason they are that way now is not immediately apparent to us, right?
There's like a kind of Chesterton's fence would be along those lines, right?
There's a kind of tacit wisdom or reason, buried in the development of this thing. And even if you don't see it, that doesn't mean it's not there. And if you start mucking around with it too much, you might find out the hard way what the reason for it, having, developed the way it did was.
But Elon's taking a chainsaw to these things and then let the chips fall where they may. And then he will try to oftentimes reverse engineer things. So, there's the example of he will call somebody like a pedophile
Mhm.
And then
This is a real example, listeners, by the way.
without, based on very, very, very flimsy evidence, circumstantial stuff. And then he will try to retroactively prove,
Right.
hire an investigator to determine that he was actually right. So
Yes.
it's like shoot first and ask questions later. And I think that is how he operates, like on Twitter verbally. And it's also his mentality for handling like Social Security.
Well, well, this is where, the conversation's been driving, I think, because this is where, like, why should you care about this man's life, his businesses? I actually think you learn a lot about him. And I think that I just want to say one more thing about the epistemological kind of humility or modesty, which is that Elon Musk does not have that in either of two senses. There's like a practical sense, right, where you just how you approach certain problems, especially when dealing with public policy, government, important institutions, right? You can approach that with epistemological modesty and just say, like, I'm just not going to make certain changes too radically, too quickly for fear of, messing things up. And Elon Musk obviously doesn't have that kind of modesty or humility. But I think it stems from the fact that he really does not view, like, the problem of knowledge does not trouble him. Like, there's nothing like, the world is a physics problem. It's matter in motion. Like, there is something totally solvable at some level about every problem or circumstance a human being encounters. Like, in principle, everything is knowable for Elon Musk based on his, like, metaphysics and view of the world. There's no mystery at the center of it all, right? It's no. And I think so. The reason he doesn't have the practical modesty or humility is because at the level of his deepest, like, approach to reality, everything is solvable in his view.
I'm thinking about
he might not know the answer yet. We might
Yeah.
not how to get there yet as a species, which is why we have to preserve the light of consciousness by living on Mars, as he wants to do. But it's like, at that base level, everything is solvable. He really believes
I'm thinking about
that.
the movie Whiplash, and I think the big question, if you saw, I'm sure you've seen the movie. It's this guy's a drummer, and his drum teacher is abusive and demanding, and you're sort of left with the question, like, is that what it takes to make it, to be the best? Do you need to have someone riding your ass all day, yelling at you, throwing things at you, or not? Like, I think it's an open question, and I'm willing to believe that we need, as a society, we need inventors who are irrational and delusional, because they don't take no for an answer. And maybe that's what you need from an inventor or whatever he is. My problem is I don't think these people should be running the government.
Right. That's
because it's
where
a different skill set. And that's where I think wisdom is a key. And I don't think he has a lot of wisdom or compassion. Another one. And by the way, I have a piece coming out sometime in at the LA Times about Trump. I'm sorry, about Trump too, but Elon's lack of empathy. And I just want to tell you in advance, I wrote it, filed it yesterday. Then I listened to part 2, and you said a lot of things that are very in sync with so I did not crib your ideas, but
I believe you.
We are thinking very, very parallel on that along those lines.
Yes. I mean, it's, I'm so glad you kind of brought us to this point, because I think people with different views of Elon Musk, his methods, as you were talking, Matt, I was thinking that when I was before my sophomore year of high school, I went to basketball camp at Indiana University and met Bobby Knight. When you said throwing stuff, it made me think of him in particular. Yeah. And so I've thought about that question, like, in that context too, basketball coaches, any kind of human endeavor that, you're trying to accomplish things. That's a real question. But so you can have a lot of different views of Elon Musk, I think, his management style, his companies, and still say something like the skill set just doesn't transfer to running the government. In part because, the operations of government are not just engineering problems. They're not just numbers on a spreadsheet. They're human beings, right? Whose lives will be radically upended if a Social Security payment is missed.
Right.
And it's troubling when you see Trump administration figures. Was it Lutwick who said if his mother, if she missed one of her Social Security payments, she wouldn't bother to really check if something was wrong or call or like need.
Because the people who do are fraudsters.
Yes, the only people who squeal when something goes wrong are the fraudsters. And it's like, what troubled me about that was, of course, the moral sentiment behind it, the kind of lack of care and concern. But also, like, why do you answer a question about Social Security that way if you're not kind of thinking perhaps there might be problems? Like, because the real answer is, a normal, sane answer is Social Security hasn't missed a payment in 70 years, and it's not going to start now. Why do you start going into hypotheticals about if one is missed, who would, only the people talking about would be fraudsters? It seems like they were preparing the ground for something bad happening.
Isn't he himself a billionaire?
I believe so. I mean, that's his.
I mean, just the optics are so bad. They're like Bond villains. And I can't believe that it hasn't blown up on them even more. I mean, Mitt Romney was pilloried as Gordon Gekko, and I get it. But come on, these guys are like out of central casting.
I know. And I mean, this is the point Bernie Sanders has been making on his oligarchy tour, that when Trump, was inaugurated, with the three richest men in the country, Musk, Bezos, and Zuckerberg, were standing right behind him, visible. And it is
front
like,
row seats. The pandemic broke his brain. Talk about that, if you would. How did the pandemic change Elon?
I mean, it certainly didn't help. And I would say, to answer that, at one level, it was just like we see him starting to say things that are more and more unhinged or disconnected from reality. He made the bet with Sam Harris that by the end of April 2020, there'd be fewer than 35,000 cases total in the United States. Right? It's like, that's just a crazy thing to say or predict.
How come no one? I mean, I don't hear this. This should be brought up every day. He was so wrong about that, and like you're the only person I've heard mention it in the past 6 months.
I know. Well, I do want to give credit to David Wallace Wells. I first read it in one of his recent 5th anniversary of the pandemic columns. But that wasn't like totally out of line with other things he's done. Like the one that really blew my mind was, remember when Paul Pelosi was attacked by the guy who cracked his skull with a hammer, like really serious, terrible stuff.
Oh, it was brutal.
Brutal.
Absolutely brutal.
Musk went in on maybe this was a gay tryst gone wrong.
Yep.
And the detail that blows my mind is Hillary Clinton had tweeted some kind of like, I hope Paul Pelosi feels better tweet, right? Like something anodyne like that. And Musk replied to her by saying, I don't know, there might be more to this story than meets the eye. And it was a link to a story about this gay tryst angle from the Santa Monica Observer or Santa Monica News, which is like a fake news outlet that had claimed in 2016 that Hillary was dead and had been replaced by a body double at the top of the ticket. And so there was this great irony of like Musk saying this insane thing about Paul Pelosi in response to Hillary Clinton, using as proof a news outlet that had claimed that Hillary Clinton actually had died like 4 or 5 years previously.
Yeah, he's been hugely wrong on big things, and nobody cares. Let's do that. Okay. I was fascinated by speaking of daddy issues. You guys make a pretty compelling case that Elon may see Trump as something of a father figure, and that I think Elon previously was very critical of Trump, but at a certain point, Elon may have started to see Trump as sort of the father figure, and that may explain this very weird but close relationship that they've forged.
Yeah, I mean, that's Sam's more of the Freudian than I am on the podcast. But you're right. Initially, back when Trump came down the golden escalator, as we all say, Musk wasn't like an early adopter of Trump or Trumpism. And I think it was a few years after Trump was elected, maybe after a White House meeting, shortly after 2016. But Musk said something like, uh, Trump is like the world's greatest bullshitter, pardon my language. And, that was like his father, Elon Musk's father, Errol. I said he's like this kind of ne'er-do-well adventurer, and the kind of BSing part of it is, we didn't mention this, but like Errol Musk was involved in an investor in an emerald mine, but ended up like not really working out. And so, Elon Musk didn't inherit a big trust fund. He didn't come to Canada and then the United States with all this money from his father's emerald mine. But I think kind of you see, if his father kind of has exaggerated his business successes, he's one of the people kind of, inflating his achievements and success as a businessman and investor. Errol Musk, that is, about himself. Who does that remind you of?
Yeah.
Trump, the guy who would call journalists pretending to be John Barron or whatever, lying about how much he's worth. There's just that kind of BSing con man almost. That's my language, not Elon's. But that is one thing that we hypothesized was behind, Musk sees a fair amount of his father in Donald Trump, possibly.
This reminded me, I have heard someone else somewhere say that Donald Trump reminded them of their father. And I'm wondering how many of Trump's fans or people, MAGA folks, have that there was something that they had a dad who was maybe, he was gruff, he was rough around the edges, but he had a heart of gold, or, whatever. Yeah, he did some bad stuff, but I'm wondering, I mean, this is getting like Oedipal or something here, but I'm wondering, like, is there something there? Like, I think people saw Ronald Reagan kind of as the ideal grandfather sitting on the front porch drinking lemonade, do we have daddy issues when it comes to Trump? And maybe because I actually had a pretty good dad, I'm immune to it, I'm not sucked into the vortex.
Yeah, I'm not either, but I think there's something to that in the sense, just even like Trump as this authority figure who's going to bring order to the chaos and is not going to let people mess with us anymore. Kind of like Daddy's coming home is going to, discipline.
Literally, there are T-shirts that say like "Daddy's home" or something. Like, yeah, my kids saw one on the soccer field the other day. Like, this is like, I don't know if it's ironic or what, but like they do call him Daddy, some of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it's ironic and sometimes not. Depends who's wearing the shirt. But I think, the even the way Trump, his the way he kind of postures with his masculinity, like it's a feature he accentuates himself, and I think his campaigns have, they've striven to give him that kind of daddy, fatherly authority figure who's going to come in and set things straight.
All right, so we've, I think, just scratched the surface on Elon Musk and the psychology, and what made him who he is. Obviously, if you're really into this, you will get your fix at Know Your Enemy, the podcast. But any final thoughts or anything I missed that you think is important?
Nothing that you missed per se. The one thing I had meant to say but didn't was that the pandemic in Elon Musk, that's also when a lot of like content moderation questions started to emerge around like COVID misinformation, and then the 2020 presidential election, and questions of, should Twitter have banned the president of the United States for what he was saying that, led to January 6th? Those were kind of questions that were hotly debated. And that was, one reason Musk ended up buying the platform. I mean, he became addicted to it, and I think really sucked into these arguments about it, and was convinced by, a lot of people around him that he was the person who could preserve free speech. But my closing thought would just be, I'm very disturbed by this man who's erratic and has a, real history of making terrible decisions, with no empathy, is running around with a chainsaw, messing around with very important, vital institutions and programs. And I actually, if you have any older listeners, I would be conservative in your spending. And, who knows what could happen? be prepared to miss a Social Security payment, perhaps. We don't know. He doesn't know either, and that's the disturbing thing.
And good luck calling a 1-800 number if you want to rectify things. That's probably not going to be available. And you may get an automated message if you try.
I hope you enjoy Elon's AI bots being your customer service help for anything related to the federal government.
Well, if you like this, or if you want to do a deep dive into, I don't know, Murray Rothbard, Ayn Rand, Frank Meyer, G. Gordon Liddy, William F. Buckley, Pat Buchanan, the greatest hits, go to Know Your Enemy, that podcast. Highly recommend it. Love it. Matthew Sitman, thanks for coming back on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.